What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. My name is Travis. This is TW Motorsports, and today, yes, we are getting into the truck motor. Well, a little bit more into the truck motor, that is. It's not going in today, but we're going to start putting some parts back on that thing because I want to get it kind of tied up with the oil pan on and whatnot before I paint it. I want to try to seal it up as tight as possible and tape as little as possible off. But we'll go in there in a second. I did get my heads back from the machine shop. They are all cleaned up and looking really nice. New valve job. I put some LS3 springs on it, which I'll show you guys when we get it in there. But let's take a look at what we need to do, and that is pretty much everything's broken down. So I went ahead and cleaned this up. I just used some razor blades. You can see how much cleaner the pistons are at this point. I am going to take some towels and do a final wipe down before we start slapping the heads on, but we need to get the old cam out. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to set you guys up on a tripod. I'm going to screw at least 2 of the water pump bolts, and I probably use the new ones because I think I tossed the old ones. But anyway, I'm going to screw a couple of the water pump bolts in because it's the same thread, and then we're going to try to turn this cam around and get it out. Now, I don't know if I showed you. I'm pretty sure I showed you guys in the last video. I did take the lifters out. I can't even think of what I'm talking about here. I took the lifters out, and if you're not taking the lifters out and you want to do this on an engine stand, honestly, guys, you can turn it upside down, spin the cam around, the lifters will push back up, and you are good to go. But in this case, yes, we are going to put a different cam in it, so, and we got the lifters out, so no issues there. We're just going to pull this thing straight out. Now, I will tell you guys, some of the 4.8s and 5.3s have some issues with cam bearings, so I'm hoping, this is a 160,000 mile motor, I'm hoping we don't have that issue. Sometimes they want to stick to the cam bearings and the cam doesn't want to come out, so we will know very quickly whether this thing's going to have to go to the machine shop or not, just based off us pulling the cam out. So once we get the cam out, I'll talk to you about what I'm replacing it with, and we'll try to get the new one in as well. So as I said, I'm using some water pump bolts. It just makes it a little easier. They do make a tool that threads into this that makes life way easier, but I've never bought one of those. This has always worked well for me. So gives you something to hold on to at least while the cam's coming out. That's a good sign. When the cam wants to come out, that's a good sign at least. You want to try to be as careful as possible, not trying to nick up those cam bearings while you're pulling this thing out. And the old one is out. So I took a look in there. The cam bearings look pretty good. There's some scoring on them, but that's pretty normal. Honestly, these things look kind of worn when they're new. So anyway, let's talk about the cam I'm going with. So GP tuning, guys. If you guys don't know, I had a ZR1 back in the day. I ordered a GP tuning cam for it. My wife's SS had a GP tuning cam. He's been great. I absolutely love the guy. He's been really helpful, especially when I was having issues getting my SS to run. He did a remote tune on it, and just stand-up guy. So I wanted to support him, and I kind of told him what I wanted. Look, I wasn't looking for anything lopey. I just wanted something to put in here to make more power than the stock cam, and I wanted to be able to run stock GM springs. So what he sent me was his GP tuning. I think it's just a stage 1 or maybe a stage 2, I'm not really sure, but some of the specs on it, it is a 207 duration, and on the intake side, 213 on the exhaust side, with a 535 lift on both. So, and then the LSA is 115. So, like I said, I just told him what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to run pretty much a stock converter, nothing crazy, but I did want to up the power. If you're taking the motor out and doing all this stuff, you might as well do that. But we do have some other things that are going to make this kind of interesting, and we'll get to that here in a little bit. But anytime you put a new cam in, I like to take this thing out and clean it up really, really well, guys, because a lot of times there's a bunch of metal shavings on it. Even though they clean it before it leaves, I still like to take it out and clean it multiple times with some brake clean and wipe it down, and then clean it again with brake clean, and then wipe it down and clean it. I almost do it like 3 or 4 times. So I'm going to go out there and do that, and then we will get some assembly lube and get this new one slid into place. So now I've got this thing nice and clean. I'm going to start putting some nasty junk on it here. This stuff is so gross, and honestly I probably should have covered the floor, but there's no way to not make a mess really doing this, guys. I will tell you that. And I'm using Melling. I'll list it in the description down below. And I use a lot. I mean a lot. Want to stay nice and gooey. And as we go through, obviously we're going to keep putting more and more on. There's probably engine builders out there like cringing, I don't know. It's always worked for me doing it this way. But I'm by no means an engine builder. That's for sure. I put some on the lobes as well as the cam bearing areas. Got my glove stuck. Sometimes that last one is a pain. All right, we are in. All right, so I'm going to clean up, and then we will work on trying to get these bolts out. I'm just going to have to clean my hands off. There's no way I'll be able to get those out. We'll get the bolts out, and then we'll get the cam retainer plate that I bought. So one thing you need to do, and I already did this when I cleaned up the motor, but you need to clean off the old gasket that used to be right here, and mine was pretty worn. The downside is, guys, they don't make the old school hex one anymore. So you have to buy the new one with the recessed bolts. And I'm not a huge fan of that because I had some issues on my SS with them coming out. And turns out I was using the wrong size. So now I have the actual tool, and we'll talk about that here in a second. So your new cam retainer plate, which I'll list below. I'll list all these parts down below, but I was going to reuse my old one, but this gasket here was completely smashed. Now, whether that really matters, I'm not really sure, but I chose to get a different one. And when you use the different one, you also have to buy the bolts, which really sucks because they're not the cheapest things in the world, and to me, they're kind of junky. But it's recessed now, and it doesn't have the hex bolts anymore. So that's kind of the downside to it, is like I said, you don't have the hex bolts, so you really have to buy new bolts and a new plate. But these already have, when you buy them from GM, they already have the thread locker on them. You can see it on there, the blue. And these things only get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. But what I was going to say is the tool that you need, a T40 fits, but it's actually a T40 plus is the size. And so I'm going to go grab that because I did buy one of those. And if you're doing this, guys, I really think it's a good idea to have that. I also like to run these down by hand to try to get them seated properly, because this thing can move, as you can see. So if you run them down equally, you won't risk cracking this plate because it's really easy to crack. But these only get torqued to 18 foot-pounds, so not a lot goes on them. But they're one of the easiest things in the world to strip, especially taking them out because they have the thread locker on them. I had to heat and heat and heat, ended up pounding a T45 in my wife's SS to get it out. So I'm going to torque these down to 18 foot-pounds, and then we should be on to the timing chain and the actual timing gear here. As you can see, I have them ran down by hand. And like I said, just for alignment reasons, I'm going to go ahead and torque them. and it isn't much. If you crack this, replace it. I've done it. It sucks. So we're good there. I'm going to go grab the actual gear, the timing gear, and the timing chain, and we'll see if we can get this all lined up. So for the next step, I did buy a new timing gear from GM for the top. And they did change it, so it's not going to look like the one that you had prior. This is the new design. They just went to where it's all the same. But timing chain, I went with the K-Tech. And the reason I went with the K-Tech is because this engine doesn't have that dog bone looking tensioner. And K-Tech honestly has a little tighter connection as far as like slop. And using with a brand new timing gear, it just seems to have way less slop in it than an LS2. Now, normally I use LS2 chains, but like I said, I chose on this one because I don't like the slop and I wasn't able to put a tensioner in there. I decided to do that, and I also bought ARP bolts. And the main reason I did that, guys, is they're cheap. They're like $6, and stock replacements are more than that. So ARP hex head bolts and the K-Tech chain with the new timing gear. So we should be good to go. I'll show you guys in a minute once I get this lined up. I'm gonna have to turn the motor over, obviously, to get the timing marks lined up, and we'll get the chain on and try to get this thing all pieced together. So at this point, I'm gonna roll the motor around and get this little dot here at the top. And we should be at top dead center, and we are on the piston. So what I need to do at this point is we obviously need to get the cam to that same point while getting the timing chain on. So I'm going to put the timing chain on, and then guys, these ARP fasteners, they specifically say to use their assembly lube. I am going to use a little blue Loctite on them. That's just what I've always done. I think it's a good idea. This is not a bolt that you want to back out. So I'm going to thread a couple in just to, once I get the timing chain in place, and then what I'll do is I'll thread one out one at a time, put some blue Loctite on them, and then we'll torque them to 26 foot-pounds. I think it's 26, I'll double check. But at this point, like I said, I'm gonna grab the timing chain, I don't even know where I set it, and we're gonna get it looped on here. This is probably one of the hardest things you'll do. And to think I've done this in the past with motors in the car just makes me crazy to think I've actually got this accomplished. I can definitely tell you there is a lot more. Alright, I'm going to put one of these in. There's a lot more slack in an LS2 chain than this. I'm going to thread a couple of these in. See that slack? Once it draws up tight, it'll be a lot better. And I'm going to roll it around and make sure that we're matching up once I roll it around a couple times. But I'm going to snug these up by hand. Then, like I said, I'll pull them out one at a time, put some Loctite on them. And we are lined up dot to dot. It still has a lot of slack in it. I really wish that this block had a provision for that. Now you can drill and tap the block, but I wasn't going to go through that. That just seems like a lot to me. As it rolls around, there's not as much, but holy cow. And just to think the LS2 one's worse. So anyway, I'm going to torque these down. The ARP stud should have torqued to 25 foot-pounds. I do think it'll get a little tighter when I get these things torqued. This is a time-consuming job, though. That's for sure. And I'm not putting a ton on it. Just a little bit. definitely tightening up. We'll look at that slack once I get this tight. I like to double check them. Way less slack than what we had. Let's roll through this just and look. Yeah, still not as good as having a tensioner, but I think it's better than, like I said, the LS2 chain. All right, on to the lifters. We're gonna put them in next. So for lifters, I bought just some LS7 lifters, and then I did buy new lifter trays as well, and the trays came with new bolts. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna wipe this surface area off and inside of these. Now I've done that a couple times, but I want things as clean as possible. And then I'm just going to dip or just put a little oil on the rollers and on the sides as I put them in to the lifter trays. And I'm also going to clean them off before I put them in, just to make sure there's nothing on them. So same thing, I'll just kind of do that off camera, clean each one off individually, and then like I said, we'll oil them up and slide them in. But I won't show you guys I'm just going to wipe this surface area off and then down in the lifter valleys just to make sure everything's clean before we actually start putting them in place. This is kind of a messy job. Got a cup here with some oil in it. And some people soak these. I don't know, I've read on both. I talked to a buddy of mine who does this all the time, and he says he does not soak them. So I'm going with what he says because, like I said, he does this all the time. So we'll just put some on the slides and on the roller. That's what he told me to do. And we'll get them lined up and slide them in. They only go in one way. And I think it's a good idea to replace the lifter trays just because some of these motors have... Oh, I'm going to have to clean that one. Alright, I'm going to have to clean this one off again. But some of these lifter trays were had an odd angle on them, so it chewed up the lifter. So anyway, I'll get this one cleaned off, and then we'll put that set in. Even I screw up from time to time. So once they're all in there, to me it's easier to put them in like this than try to thread this guy over them. And they do go in a certain way. The cutout goes up. And if you guys are using like the link bar setup, you don't even have to use this stuff. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and do these other four. I won't show you guys that, and then we'll talk about the bolts and the torque specs, and I am going to use probably a little bit of blue Loctite on the bolts, but we'll get to that here in just a minute. So once we have those in, I am going to put just a drip of Loctite on them. Not much at all. I don't even know that I'd call putting any on it, but probably don't need to. But 106 inch-pounds, so definitely not very much to get these things tight. That's almost hand tight, to be honest with you. So I'm going to go ahead, get these put in and torque down, and then we'll move on to, I'm going to clean the head surfaces off, and then we'll talk about why I'm doing the next step. We're going to put the heads on, but why I'm using what I'm using, and so on and so forth. So like I said, I'm going to go ahead and put these on, torque them 106 inch-pounds, not torque foot-pounds, inch-pounds, and then we'll clean. I'm going to clean this surface off once again. I'm going to clean the surface of the heads off. Actually, I take that back. I'm going to clean the surface of this off, and then we will get the next parts, and like I said, we'll talk about why I'm using that. So at this point, we're really ready to put the head on. So we've got everything torqued down, tightened up. I've went over this a couple times cleaning it. And here's what we're going to be using, guys. These are actually head studs. Now, why would I choose a head stud? Well, the same reason I'm going to use an LS9 head gasket. And maybe down the road, I'll do some boost on this thing. And I don't want to tear it back apart. to redo something that I wish I would have done while I had it apart. So I could have bought the stock set of bolts, which is around $80 or $90 to buy a set of stock torque to yield bolts, and you have to worry about swinging them a certain degree past after they're torqued to a certain sequence. These guys you just torque and that's it. Now, these are the cheaper versions, and there's been some horror stories of them snapping. They're made by Speedmaster, and I'll list them down in the description below, but hopefully we don't have any issues. They're relatively easy. I did go ahead and spray them each one off individually, but I'm going to go ahead and thread these in. Now, this is a Gen 3 block, so you have two short ones up top on both sides. So if your kit comes with 4, that's what's going on. I am going to go ahead and put, well, maybe not. I think I'm going to go ahead and put the block dowels or the head dowels in before I thread these into place. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and thread all these in, and then we'll set the gasket on, and then hopefully the head after that. Another thing I will tell you guys, they only go in one direction, but there is a spot on the top. I'm just snugging them down. That's the only thing I'm using that for. You don't need to get them super tight. I'm just making sure they're rammed down all the way because my hands are kind of slippery. So don't worry about trying to torque these, because there is no real torque on threading them into the block itself. So your short ones go in the top corners, and you're not supposed to torque these down. Like I said, I'm just getting them snug with this because my hands are a little slippery. The other thing is, a lot of times, guys, people will choose to put the head on first, and you can do that. It doesn't really matter. It's probably honestly easier to do it that way, but I don't know. I'm not doing it the easy way, I guess. So now I'm going to go grab the head gasket. You can see I have my dowels down here in the corner. We're ready to go. So I'm going to go grab my head gasket, put it into place. And like I said, I am using an LS9 head gasket, and I know it's not the correct size for this, but it works really well on boosted 5.3s. So that's what I'm going to use. It's a multi-layer steel gasket. Of course, I'll list it in the description down below. And then I'm going to take some cleaner and clean my head off, just because it's been setting. It's probably got some dust on it. I want to make sure there's no debris on the seating surfaces. I'll probably even go over this one more time just in case some dust came off my hand. Just always a good idea to keep it as clean as possible. And then we'll slap the gasket on and put the head into place. So if you notice, there is a front labeled on here, so that faces obviously the front of the motor. I'm going to set this into place here. And this is where, like I said, it may be easier to do your studs after, and probably doing it wrong. I'm sure somebody out there will scream, but it's the way I did it. I may do it differently on the other side. So I'm going to go grab the head at this point, and we should be good to get this thing on. Everything's looking good. You can see what I'm talking about. They don't quite come up to the cylinders like the factory one would. So I'm going to go grab the head, and we'll get it in place. I'm trying to push this down as far as I can so we're not having any pinches. You can hear the motorcycle driving by my house. I got the garage door open. So the head's nice and cleaned off. Let's see if we can get this in place. Maybe easier said than done. Oh, went on better than I thought. You can see my blue valve springs. Like I said, nothing major done to these heads other than just a cleanup, a valve job, and they did change the springs for me. Just saves me some work, to be honest with you, because I don't have a tool to do it off the car. I have one to do it on the car that sets in place the rockers, but woo, looks nice. So the next thing, I'll blow through the other one so you guys don't have to watch it, and then we'll start actually putting the washers in, using some assembly lube, and getting this thing actually snugged down. So guys, it's a couple nights later. I just ran out of time that night. I did want to tell you guys that I did run a thread chaser through here. I have an ARP thread chaser for all of these bolt holes before I actually done this, and then I made this just it's a piece of plastic straw and then just duct tape to a thing for my shop vac, and I use that to suck out all the holes, making sure that we're seated properly. Now the other night I just set the heads on, didn't bolt anything down. Obviously the studs are in, but I've taken the time to clean all these up, and you can see where it left some marks. So obviously these do need to be cleaned. I just used some brake clean on them, but now we're going to start putting them together. So on the ARP stuff in the past, there's a spot, the washer goes a certain way. On these cheaper ones, that is not the case. They're the same on both sides. So I'm just going to start putting them on there. Now, obviously, I've got some assembly lube, and I do have some ARP assembly lube. I'm not sure if that's going to be enough. If I run out of that, I may end up using some motor oil. But we're going to start putting these in place, and then we'll go over how I'm going to torque them. So one of the things you want to make sure of is that you get this stuff on both sides of the washer. So inside and outside, and this, I'm telling you guys, is one messy job. And it's kind of a pain in the fact that some of these things are hard to get to. So these top ones aren't too bad, the smaller ones, but the bottom ones are obviously a huge pain. So the cool thing is once you get your hands dirty, you might as well go ahead and do all of them. So I'm going to start, like I said, doing each one of these, and holy cow, it's going to be a mess. So good news and bad news. The good news is I got them all in on both sides. I only showed you guys one side. The bad news is one of them is not, one of the nuts on the bigger ones on the other side is not wanting to thread properly. So I'm going to call and order another one, at least one. I haven't had any issues with the other ones. I ran them down by hand, but at this point we need to torque them. So they go in 3 stages. So 25, then 50, and then 70 if you're using like the lube that I'm using. So I'm just using ARP fastener lube. So 25, 50, and 70 is how they should torque down. And I'm actually on my phone, I've got a little cheat guide that shows you the sequence in which you need to torque them down. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to do 25 on the big ones, and then these are 22, the smaller ones. Then I'm going to go to 50, and then I'm going to re-torque these to 22, and then I'm going to go 70, and I'm going to torque those to 22 again. Now, I can only do this side, unfortunately, because, well, obviously I have a bad one, so I'm going to have to wait and order another one, which sucks, but that's kind of what you go through when you're working on stuff. Not everything goes as planned. So I'm going to go ahead and start this process. I don't know whether I'll show you guys this or not. I'll try to show you, though, the one that's messed up and kind of what I'm talking about after I get these torqued down. So I went through this side completely, and it is completely torqued down. No issues whatsoever. I was a little worried because, you know, these cheaper studs have been known to break off in the block. And that's why I really don't want to risk. This is the one that I was telling you I was having an issue with. So everything's good. You can see it spins on really well, and then it gets snug about right here. Now, if I take a wrench and go around, it is really, really snug right there. So if I keep going, it starts to loosen up right about there. The problem is that is about where it needs to torque to. So I don't have a lot of faith that it's going to torque correctly if I use it. So I think I'm going to call the company, and it gets really easy as we go that far down. So I think I'm going to call them, see if they can send me another one. At least I'm hoping. And then we'll just have to continue this another day, obviously. At this point, I'm still waiting on the shims to shim up the oil pump. You know, a lot of times in the past, I've just slapped them on and been fine. But I figured, why not do it the right way? Go ahead and shim it. So while I wait for that, you can see I've got it on my engine hoist again. And that's because I can't get the rear cover off without, or with it on the stand. There's just no way to get all the 10mm bolts out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually have my wife come out here and hold it, but I'm going to take the 10mm out, get the old one out of place. Once we get the old one out of place, guys, the correct way to do this is you need to align the actual cover itself. So the rear cover needs to be aligned. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm just going to put a flat edge where the oil pan goes and then torque this thing down. But I need to get the old one off, so I'm going to go ahead, grab my 10 millimeter, whip these all out, and then I'll go grab the new one. And it comes with an alignment piece in it, which really doesn't really matter, but it does make it a little easier. You can actually buy the whole cover just about, I think it's like $10 more than just buying the actual seal. So I'm gonna go grab my 10 millimeter, get this out of the way, and then I'll show you guys the new one. Now, once you get this thing off, you do need to clean up the mating surfaces. Now, some people choose to replace the little barbell here. Mine looks like it's in and in good shape, so I'm not going to replace it. There is a billet one. The problem with the billet one is it's such a close tolerance that I'm not sure that you can install it without actually drilling that out a little bit, and I don't want to deal with that. So I'm going to go grab a razor blade, kind of scrape some of this down, clean it up, and then I'll go grab the new one. Now I have this whole surface cleaned off, and you can see my new one. So the new one not only comes with the new rear cover, it comes with new bolts all the way around. It also comes with the gasket already installed. So all we need to do is we need to line this guy up with the center of this, and I'm going to go ahead and start a few of the bolts that I can. And this has some movement in it, and that's why you need to worry about alignment. I think I'm going to have to go grab, no, maybe not. I thought I was going to have to go grab a 13. The other thing is, instead of being 10 millimeters, the new one's going to be 13. So I am going to go grab probably a 13 wrench. I'm just going to snug some of these up, not all of them. And then once I get them a little bit snug, I'm going to go grab a flat edge, and I'm going to have my wife come out and kind of hold the motor from moving around. The downside is obviously you can see the motors moving back and forth while I'm trying to do this. But basically what you want is you want no more than 20 thousandths between the bottom of this and the actual pan itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a flat edge on there and make sure that it's where it needs to be. And then once we get to that point, we can go ahead and torque these down to 18 foot-pounds. So now I've got it snug down, and looks like I'm going to have to knock the pan up, or the rear cover up just a little bit. May have to go grab a rubber mallet. Just using a piece of flat. That side is good. This side looks pretty good as well. Looks like it needs to come down just a hair. That's good. I think we're good. So now I'm going to go ahead and snug these down. I'll check it one more time, and then we'll torque them to 18 foot-pounds. So at this point, I put the flat edge on it. It is 100% square even after snugging these down. I'm going to go ahead and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now, there is no sequence, so you don't have to go in a certain direction. However, I do go like here and then up top to the bottom, and then work my way kind of like you would a wheel. But I'm going to go ahead and torque these down, and then we should be good. Hopefully in the next couple days I'll have the shims for the front. We can put the front cover on. So after waiting just a hair over forever, I went ahead and just bought some feeler gauges. I was ordering some from Sac City. I don't know if because of the fires in California or what's going on, but I haven't got them. So I just went and bought some feeler gauges. And I always like to do this. I say always, honestly, here recently, I've been more apt to do this, but using a feeler gauge to install the oil pump. But the oil pump that we got is a Melling, it's a 296, so a 10296. And guys, it comes with everything that you need for the most part. It comes with new pickup tube O-rings, which we'll discuss a little bit later. And if you want to drop the pressure by about 10 pounds, it comes with a different spring and new plug for the bottom. But we're going to install it just like this. But in the past, so don't quote me on this, I put these in the past, never shimmed these, never had any issues. But because we've got it apart, it's easy to access. I'm going to go ahead and shim this. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this apart. So a T30 takes the outer ring off here. So I'm going to go ahead and take that off. I'm going to take the two inner gears out, and then we're going to put it kind of loosely in place with the stock bolts. So on the front of the engine here, I'm going to go ahead and put the housing itself in place, and then we'll get the shims out. We'll talk about what size I'm going to use and kind of how I'm going to shim this, and then we'll torque it down, put it all back together, and we should be good to go. Literally, guys, I have been waiting on this for quite some time now, so I'm excited to get this on, because once we get that on, then we can put the front timing cover on, flip this thing over, get the pickup tube all assembled, and then the oil pan on. So I've got those T30s out, so what we're going to do is we're going to pull this plate off and set it aside, and then we're going to pull the two gears out, and we're going to set those aside as well. So it may be a little difficult to do that. And there's no oil on this. A lot of times these come shipped with oil. They're supposed to test them, whether they do or not. You know, that's their claim to fame, is that they do. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and put this guy in place, just like this. And I'm going to, like I said, loosely thread these in, just hand tight. And then what we will do is we will start with the center gear. I'm going to get a little bit of oil to put on them because, like I said, it is pretty dry. Get these ran down. And I will tell you guys, I'm not using a tensioner, but if you do have a tensioner, make sure it's not touching back there. You really won't know until you get it torqued down whether it is, but see, you have some movement here. Look how much movement there is. So I'm going to grab some oil. We'll oil down this center gear, and then we'll put it in place, and we'll talk about what shims we're going to use. So I went ahead, as you can see, and slid the center gear in. Now the downside to not using like the Sac City ones is they're pliable. Well, the ones I got are metal, and I don't think they're going to fit with this guy in place. So see if I can knock this out. There we go. So I can at least get it out of the way and get my shims in place. But that gear is in place. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some 2/1000 shims, and I think that's what we'll start with. And then I think we'll probably use 3/1000 or 4/1000. That's what comes with that Sac City kit on the outer. But for now, let's go ahead and grab the at least three 2/1000 shims and see if we can get them in place. So I have three 2/1000 shims. And you may have to wiggle this thing around to get them in place. Try to equally space them as much as you can. So as you can see, I went ahead and put the outer gear in, and these are a 3/1000 shim. And so if it's kind of hard to put in, you can move this thing around to try to get it where you need it. definitely some alignment issues, I would say, of just putting it on. Like I said, I've done this in the past, never had an issue. Okay, so I don't want you guys to think if you don't have this or don't want to do this that you have to. It just makes me feel more comfortable since, like I said, I've got it apart. And these all seem pretty good. That one seems a little looser than the other. All pretty good here. All right, so at this point what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab some Loctite, some blue Loctite. I'm going to pull each one of these out individually and put some blue Loctite on them. Making sure again here. Yeah. And put them back in, and we're going to torque them to 18 foot-pounds. Now once we get that torqued, then we can go ahead and pull all of this out and put the front cover back on and torque it down. So at this point, like I said, take these out, put some blue Loctite on, and torque them to 18 foot-pounds. So now that we have that in place, you can go back and make sure that you can still move them in and out pretty easily. And we can, so at this point I'm going to go ahead and pull them out, and we will put the front cover back on the actual oil pump. So if you guys want, it doesn't hurt to put a little bit of oil in here. It might actually help things. So go ahead and put some oil on here, and then the front cover bolts, that T30, those get torqued to a max of 106 inch-pounds. I'm actually going to go, it says anywhere from 80 to 106 inch-pounds. I'm going to go right in the middle at like 90 to 95 is what I'm going to torque them at. I am going to put just a dab of blue Loctite on them as well. You don't have to get crazy with that. Literally just a dab is all I'm going to put on. Now that we have this thing all torqued down, I went ahead and flipped the motor over. So we're going to go ahead and install the pickup tube. Now, the pickup tube installs with a rubber O-ring here on the bottom of the actual oil pump. And so guys, there's two different ones that come with it. There's a green one and a black one. So if you have a, I'll show you the end here. If this end is tapered, so if it goes out, then you would use the green. If it has an indentation for the actual O-ring to sit in, you would also use green. Because mine is straight, you actually use the black one. So there's instructions in the box that tell you which one, and you guys can measure if you'd like. But I'm going to go ahead and put the black one on, and then we're going to install this back into place. Obviously you have the two pieces that bolt it to the bottom of the windage tray, and then the actual 10 millimeter, I believe it's 10, that goes into the actual pump itself. I did put a little bit of oil on that just to make it slide in a little nicer. We're going to see if we can get it in place here. Now this is the hard part if you're doing a cam while the motor's in the vehicle, because let me tell you, this thing right here can fight you because you have to slide the pan down and then try to get it in place, so it makes it really, really hard. And you want to make sure that this is seated, because if you don't, you will have zero oil pressure when you first go to start it. I think I about got it. I have to spin it around a little bit. I think I about got it here. And once you got it, then you can go ahead and put your bolts in. So once you get this thing seated like it is now, I'm going to go ahead and torque this down 106 inch-pounds here. And then guys, I cannot find for the life of me the torque specs on the two nuts that go on there. I'm going to do those to 18. They're about the same size as the front. And honestly, you could probably just snug them down and get them tight, but I couldn't find it, so sorry about that. Go ahead, 106 here. I'm going to tighten those down, and then we will go grab the front cover and the alignment piece. Now that that's all torqued down, we are ready for the front cover. So what I've done here is I've cleaned all this. I did that originally, cleaned all the old gasket material off, and I took this to the machine shop, and they put it in their tank to get all the oil off the front of it. But then I went ahead and scraped it a couple more times and cleaned off the old gasket material. But as you can see, I have the new GM gasket in place, which I will list below, and I'd like to thread the bolts in to hold the gasket in place. So I also took some time and cleaned all the bolt heads off because, like I said, I am going to be painting this motor. But at this point, I'm going to go ahead and loosely thread these in place, and then we will talk about the alignment tool that I've got. It is generally, when you take these to machine shop, they're going to go ahead and pull your old seal, the timing cover seal, out because it'll just melt in their machine. They don't want that. So mine's already gone. If not, guys, you are going to have to knock your old seal out here. But the alignment tool I have works. They make one that works with the seal in place, and then they make one that works without the seal in place. But a majority of the time, if you're changing the cam, you would want to change that seal anyway. So I just have the one, and let me go see if I can grab it here. This guy right here. And so what it does is it slides in place on the crank, and this has a ton of movement up and down. So it aligns that, and then once we have it aligned here, we'll make sure that our gaps are good going to the actual block itself, and then we can snug it down. But you can see how much room it can move back and forth. So we want to make sure that it's nice and square, and sometimes it's a good idea to put a little bit of oil on that. So I'm going to do that as well, and I'm going to run these down a little bit tighter by hand before I do that. Now, once we get everything aligned, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to lay a straight edge on the top of this. We will go ahead and torque these to 18 foot-pounds. And then this thing is pretty cool because it works as a seal installer too, but I'll show you guys that when we're ready for that part. So I went ahead and laid a flat edge down. All these are snug down. Well, I guess for the most part they're snug down. I'm going to go ahead, guys, and torque this with this in place to 18 foot-pounds like I had said. And then we can go ahead and remove this out of the way. Once you have everything torqued down, you can go ahead and pull this guy off there. And as I said, it works as a seal installer. So I've got a new seal from GM as well. And so what I like to do is get it kind of started. And then if you put this guy up over the top of it, you can use it to knock it into place. Sometimes people use a block of wood. The downside is you have a crankshaft sticking out of the center, so it makes it a little bit cumbersome to try to use a block of wood to knock it in. Now, it can be done without that. You can lightly tap it in all the way around, but this makes sure it's nice and flush and really sets it in place. So now that we're finished with that, I still got to pop that in a little further, but I'm going to go grab the oil pan gasket, and we do need to put some sealant on that, and we'll talk about that before we get the gasket into place. So we're ready to put the oil pan on, but there's a couple things we need to do. First off, I'm going to do similar to what I did on the front cover. I'm going to put the new oil pan gasket with the bolts down here. I'm going to go ahead and thread the bolts on the bottom of it so we're not fighting the gasket. Now, the other thing we need to do is these areas right here, so where the block meets the front cover on both sides, and then in the back, it will leak here as far as oil goes. So you want to put something as far as silicone in these corners. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. And guys, I am just using some Permatex gasket maker. That is all you need. And I'm just going to put a small bead in these corners, and then we can go ahead and set the pan into place. Now, while you're putting the pan in, one of the things you need to make very sure of is that the pan does not stick out further in the back than the actual rear of the block, because if it does, you're going to break it or put a crack in it while you're bolting the transmission down. So it's a good idea to have some sort of straight edge that keeps it level with where the transmission bolts on, because it does have some movement in it as well. So to me, I like putting it together like this. I know on my Trans Am I did a little bit differently, but we're going to see if we can set it into place and get it snugged down. One of the things I forgot to talk about, guys, is make sure that you cleaned off the block and the pan. I did do that. I also sent the pan to the machine shop and had it cleaned. So we're ready to put it on. You can see I've got silicone in the corners, and I've got these bolts threaded in, so hopefully we don't have any issues. Sometimes getting this guy lined up can be a pain. And we'll talk about what this is on the front here in just a minute once we get this thing started. I think we're in place. Let's get these couple of these bolts threaded down and started, and then we'll worry about moving it forward or backwards or wherever we need to be in alignment with the transmission. I need to go get a straight edge. Thought I had one here, but apparently I don't have one up here with me. So we'll get this lined up, and these guys get torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Now, with that being said, there are two smaller ones that go in the back. They're really long, they're M6, and so those guys actually get torqued to 106 inch-pounds, similar to your smaller stuff. So I'm going to go ahead, get this thing lined up, and torque those down, and then we'll come back and talk about what our next steps are going to be, and we'll talk about what this is all about. So we got it all torqued down. At this point, I think the last thing I'm going to do in this video, guys, is we're going to put the water pump on. So I am going to put a few sensors in place to plug some holes, like the oil level sensor. I'm going to put it in, and the heads. I think there's a couple that go in the heads that I just saw laying around. Oh, the coolant temp sensor. I won't show you guys that, but I am going to show you me putting the water pump on. So I'm going to roll this motor back around. But before we do, I wanted to talk about this and what this is all about. So obviously we put ARP head studs in, or not ARP, but off-brand head studs. We put LS9 heads, gaskets in it. And the reason I did all that is because I thought at some point I might boost this thing. Well, I've got a buddy who has a shop, 417 Motorsports, and I called him and said, hey, I want to go ahead and put a drain for a turbo in the front of this motor. So that is what this guy is, and he put a plug in it. So what I can do is, for now, because it's not going to be turbo, I can just put the plug in, and then when I want to turbo it, obviously I can pull it out. So I didn't want to have to drill. I hate drilling in a pan and then trying to keep all the shavings out of the pan. So I figured let's go ahead and do this while we've got it out. So maybe down the road, guys, you're catching a glimpse of what we may do to this truck. But like I said, I'm going to roll this thing back over. We will get the water pump on, and then I'm going to tape it up off camera and paint it with some engine paint, which I think I have here. I'll show you. I'm just using Duplicolor engine enamel. Nothing real fancy or crazy, just in black. So I'm not going to paint it any odd colors or anything. Just want to clean it up and make it look nice. So we'll roll this thing over and get this water pump in place. So at this point we got it flipped over and we're ready to put the water pump in. Now I did buy a brand new GM water pump, and I'm hoping, yeah, just making sure everything's good. It comes with new gaskets. The other thing, guys, is because you're using a new one, I do wipe this down around the outside, and I've already done that. And I also scraped this back when I got this apart. So we are good to go in with the new gaskets. I did buy new bolts. If you've ever seen these bolts before, man, they are just trash when they come out. So some people use thread sealant on these, some do not. I am not going to, but I am going to put new gaskets in as we put it back together, and then we'll go ahead and talk about the torque specs once I get it started. I like to put the gasket on similar to what I did on the front cover and the oil pan. The downside is these don't actually hold in place, so they don't thread into the gasket like the other ones do. But since it's off, if you get two of them started, the third one generally isn't too much of an issue. Sometimes you got to move it around a little bit, but now if you buy this kit from IHC for the water pump bolts, is what I used. I didn't buy the GM ones. It comes with new thermostat housing bolts as well. So I went back and forth on whether I should put this on before I paint it, but I think I want to paint this too. I'm going to tape this off. We'll get these ran down and then we'll torque them. So now that the pump's on and these are snug down, all we need to do is go around and do 11 the first round,
and then 22 the second round. So I will tell you guys that I like to alternate, so I'll do here, and then top, bottom, just like you would put on a wheel, or similar to the heads. There is a sequence. I just don't like to tighten all of one side down and then all the other side down. So go back and forth, making sure you hit them all at 11 and then all at 22. At this point off camera, I went ahead and taped this thing up, and like I said, I'm going to paint it. I'm not going to show you guys that, but for today, or for this video, I say for today, this has been going on for a couple weeks, guys. As you've probably noticed, I had to have different clothes on, or the lighting's been different, but just been working a little at a time. When I had that issue with the head bolt or the head stud, that threw me off a couple weeks, and so it's been taking me some time to get this accomplished. But like I said, I'm going to paint this, and then hopefully in the next video, if everything goes good, or at least the next video on this truck, we're going to have everything cleaned up. You guys aren't seeing the stuff that I'm doing off camera, so I'm doing a lot of cleaning on parts like the front drive assembly and whatnot, and painting those off camera. That way you guys don't have to watch like a time lapse of me doing that. So hopefully all that'll be finished. We can get some stuff bolted on this thing and get it set in the truck in the next video. That is my goal. That's my goal, guys. My goal is to have this thing running in like less than a month. So hopefully throughout a couple videos we can get that accomplished. But if you did like this video, guys, like always, please smash that thumbs up button. If you are not subscribed, go down, hit that subscribe button. Make sure you ring that bell icon. That notifies you every time we drop a new video. And well, stay tuned to see this thing come together.